Welcome and good morning, everyone. This is Damon Dickinson with Heart Meditation for Beginners. And I would like to share with you a good friend of mine. I've had the pleasure of knowing Glenn for a year or two. And we're going to be talking a little bit about indigenous cultures and their principles and how they affect and can be weaved into our modern corporate culture. And just a little bit more about my friend Glenn Geffken is an expert in strengthening organizational culture with centuries-old wisdom of indigenous people, drawing from a varied career in both large and small businesses with a background in sales, business development, sponsorship, large-scale event production, publishing, and sustainability. Glenn has a keen ability to help business leaders and professionals cut through hidden dynamics that block progress and bring to light those things which open leaders to new possibilities. And welcome, Glenn.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Awesome. So, I love what you were just talking about before we got started, which is another venture, and I believe you're one of the founders of, is this Journeyman's organization. And I would love for you to just speak to that for a moment too, if you would. Just what is Journeyman's?
Yeah, well, just to clarify, I'm not one of the founders, but
okay.
I am an integral member of the team. I've been on the board for about 3.5 years. It started 8 years ago here in Asheville. As an outcrop from another organization called Boys to Men, which has been around about 20 years and has affiliate organizations all over the country in Canada and Europe and in different places. And it's all kind of evolved steadily going back to like the birth of the men's movement in the 1970s and 80s, and men learning to mentor other men to become better men, in the Mankind Project. So it was men out of the Mankind Project that started Boys to Men in the 1990s. and then it was around 2007 or 8, there was a couple of men, John Lydell and Chris Frisco from the Asheville community of MKP here, who wanted to start a Boys to Men chapter in Asheville, and they ended up making a Journeyman, kind of creating our own brand and our own 501c3 and board and all of that. So I joined the board 3.5 years ago. So I've been very involved in the last 2.5 years, I guess you would say. I've been steadily getting more and more involved on the program side of it, not just on the board, on a business level. And so twice a year, we do rites of passage experiences for boys age 12 to 17. We take them out into a camp out environment, and we initiate them. It's a very well choreographed 48-hour period of time in which we initiate them into manhood. And then we have an ongoing mentoring program that takes place throughout the year as well. So it's a very powerful program for, I would say, both the boys and the men, because I certainly receive greatly from it. Every time I go and staff one of these weekends, I come back feeling like I have more skills and more ability and clarity to be a better man in the process of helping these young men to discover their gifts and what it means to them to be a man. So it's an amazing program.
That's beautiful, Glenn. It is amazing in my own life when I realize how much I receive every time that I give. Mm-hmm. And man, I wish I had something like that to guide me as I was moving from, a kid into young adulthood. I had those initiations. There's so many. What I want to say, the current culture doesn't offer a lot of empowering ways for us to enter adulthood. At least in my experience.
And this is something that's an age-old tradition. Initiating boys and girls into manhood and womanhood, excuse me, is something that's been around for thousands of years, and it's really been lost ever since the Industrial Revolution and so much of the destruction of indigenous ways and sort of discounting the importance and wisdom in indigenous ways. We've lost this component. And yet, if you look at boys and girls who've been initiated in a ritual way, in a way that helps them discover their unique gifts in the world, in a way that helps boys to bond with men and girls to bond with women, and you look at their lives down the road, it's really amazing, for young people to start out 18, 19, 20 years old and really know who they are and really are like poised in how they carry themselves and conduct themselves. I mean, it took me a lot of years of manhood or shall we say adulthood, to become the man that I am today.
Yeah, I can relate. Myself as well, I still feel like I'm growing up in many ways into actually being an adult. And
that's how we all feel. those of us mentors in the Journeyman program, we kind of all share the same sentiment, is that we wish we had something like that, and we feel like we're still learning. And I think that's part of what it means to be a good man, is that you never just reach a point where you say, okay, I got it, I'm a man now, but that you're constantly looking and constantly being open to developing yourself.
Yes, yes, I agree as well. And talking about these indigenous principles, which is again the theme of what I'd like to talk about and hear more from you today, and how this ties in. Um, you remember the book? I don't know if you've ever read it. I think it was Last Days of Ancient Sunlight.
Last Days of Ancient Sunlight?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with that book.
Well, in essence, and I choose to remember the name of the author. I read it back in the late 90s. The basic premise was a lot about peak oil. And in general, he studied city-states and their structures and was showing how unsustainable their practices and principles were of absorbing as much of the outer resources as possible to build this great empire. And then as far as, they would reach out as far as they could and absorb all the resources and then basically implode.
Right.
And that the only sustainable models that have lasted for tens of thousands of years come out of indigenous tribes, which then he went and found, which there's only maybe a handful in the world anymore that still exist, and looked for the common threads and principles within each of those remaining civilizations and pulled those together, which is a lot. I'd love to hear what you've learned from that, because now you're bringing in, not only with the Journeyman organization to young men, but then taking these same principles and bringing them into our modern corporate culture to create more sustainability. And so, it's a beautiful thing, because again, we're looking for ways that we can stay sustainable for long term, not just the bottom line of making more money. So, and again, what is the purpose of the work that we do? I mean, how does that fit into the picture with the indigenous principles?
Well, you're starting out by going right to the core of the whole thing, which is, why do we work? And so what we've been taught, particularly since the 1970s and the age of Milton Friedman economics. Milton Friedman was an economist who won the Nobel Prize and was highly lauded and respected and advised presidents, was a big advisor to the Reagan administration, for example. And he put forth a philosophy that says that businesses fundamentally exist to deliver profits, and everything else is secondary to that. And because he was so authoritative and he was very sophisticated in the creation of his economic models, and of course, he became a Nobel laureate. So everybody in our Western way of thinking is, when people have accomplishments and recognitions and degrees and things like that, we think, oh, we must listen, they are the authority, we must believe what they have to say. Or if a president says that, or if a president says that we cut taxes on large organizations, and that will eventually trickle down and build up the middle class, even though there's never been a shred of evidence that's shown that it actually works that way. But because it comes from on high, we believe it is the authority. And that's the Western thinking culture, the Western way, is we put people on pedestals. Even if you go to professional conferences, even if they're conferences that are based very much in shall we say, good intentions, for lack of a better way of putting it, all the speakers, and even the way you read my bio in the beginning, we all have a bio, right? You talk about that person's accomplishment, and he's written this book, and he has these degrees, and he's started this company, and we think, oh, put him on a pedestal, we must listen to him. And the indigenous realm, everything is much different than the Western realm. People are held in high respect, not by what they've accomplished, but by how they conduct themselves. And the people that are the greatest, that are given the highest respect, are the elders, who tend to live extremely humbly and place little to no value on materialism and material possessions in their culture. And when I say, and I am sort of generalizing when I say they, like indigenous culture, but truly there is a dramatic similarity between indigenous cultures all over the globe, even going back 500 years when they were separated by continents and didn't necessarily have a way of connecting or even knowing of each other's existences. Their language and their customs and their ceremonies were different, but their value systems are all pretty much the same. So when I say they, I'm really in a broader context referring to indigenous people. There are some exceptions, but they're all pretty much the same in that value system. And that value system is you value your elders because they're the ones that pass the culture on. They're the ones that have lived a long time. And they're not just people that got old, but they're people that lived a certain way, spiritually and in connection to the land, to where they've reached a certain age where they have wisdom to impart. And then we respect them for that wisdom, and we try to do all we can to take care of them so that they can keep passing that wisdom on.
Yes.
And another sort of opposite aspect to Western culture is the way that women are revered in indigenous cultures. And again, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, indigenous cultures are matriarchal. So like in the early days of colonialism, when the Europeans came to this country and they saw that the men were chiefs, they made an erroneous assumption that indigenous culture here, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so hopefully I won't have to cough too much.
Well, and I'm loving what you're saying. And could you just for a moment, let's back up for 1 second, and then let's jump back in, because I do want to hear more about the matriarchal model. Can we just even give a basic definition of what an indigenous culture is, and maybe an example or two that people might connect to who aren't as familiar with what we're talking about in that sense?
That's kind of a big question in itself, actually. Deal with.
Let's see if we can give a simple answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of different definitions of it, you know, and there's a lot of different ways of referring to them. You know, some people say Indian, but then Indian, like, you know, Christopher Columbus, when he came over, he thought he reached India, you know, the West Indies. So that was sort of an erroneous term, although a lot of Native Americans call themselves Indian.
Right. What's your favorite definition for
I use the word indigenous because indigenous means like rooted in a place, like they've always been there. Yet at the same time, if you go back far enough, all of us are indigenous. So those of us who are Caucasian, for example, if we go back far enough in our European ancestry before what we would consider to be civilization, we all lived as indigenous people, close to the land, tribally, spiritually based, giving gratitude to the natural elements. So it's kind of like people that are rooted in a place, they've always been there, they're the original people, and they live in connection with nature, and they see themselves as a part of nature, not in dominion over it. I guess that's the simple answer to what I mean by indigenous.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because, you know, you do hear like we need to learn from our past so we don't recreate it. And, you know, there's a lot of, like, you look in school, or at least for me, you know, the history class, and most of the events and stuff that we're taught in the class, it's like, why do I want to learn these facts and these things, which I never saw a lot of value in. But then as I grew up, and like you're saying, when I actually, one of my first spiritual paths that I began to explore was Native American tradition, which, like, oh, what I'm really looking for is that deeper wisdom from the past that was learned that I can incorporate into my life now. So it's not really about the events, but the lessons learned and the principles involved.
Right, and we do in our school systems, there's a heavy focus on what battles took place and what governments took over and things of that nature, and not necessarily how they lived and how they felt about things and what their value systems were then versus now.
Yes. So coming back to the matriarchal model, unless you want to segue into something else, that's a fascinating piece to me, because I see in some ways that's starting to return, like the balance of the feminine energy and respect for women. So I'd love to hear more about that. Right.
So when the colonialists came to this country, they erroneously made the assumption that that the indigenous people here were patriarchal because the chiefs were men. But what they didn't realize was that the chiefs were largely appointed by the council of elder women, and the real power in the tribes came from the elder women. So they've always been matriarchal because we live on this planet Earth, which is considered a feminine energy, and the sun is considered a masculine energy. And that's the way that indigenous people see it. And they also see, and I'm looking up for something here in my book that I want to read. I haven't quite memorized this yet, but there's a, here it is. And by the way, for your viewers, here's my book. It's called Shift, Indigenous Principles for Corporate Change. And chapter 11 is the roles of men and women. And I begin with a Cherokee proverb that's, a woman's highest calling is to lead a man to his soul so as to unite him with source. a man's highest calling is to protect a woman so she's free to walk the earth unharmed. So in many indigenous traditions, they see the women as being the more spiritual gender. And for example, you know, I've been involved in conducting and hosting sweat ceremonies for a number of years. And I remember when I first started hosting sweat ceremonies and inviting different people, and there would be women who would come who were, shall we say, you know, had a background in feminism. And they would see when it came time to prepare sacred foods that it was always the women that were asked to do this, that would kind of like irritate and upset them, that they felt that, you know, only men do certain things here and women do certain things there. And that's because in our Western thinking culture, we've diminished women to this role of, you know, you take care of the children, you cook, you clean the house, I'll go out and do the real work of bringing in the money. Okay, but again, flipping the model upside down, in indigenous thinking, if you look at food as being sacred, as something that sustains our lives and gives us health and energy and vitality, and you look at the food itself as being sacred, as being a gift from the Creator, who better would you want to prepare to handle that and to bless it than the more sacred, the more spiritual of the two genders, being the women?
Yes. And then how does this bridge over into like corporate culture? So how do we make that bridge?
That's a great question, and there isn't necessarily an easy answer, but then there is at the same time, right? Because in a simpler society, you know, you have physical work and you have tedious work and you have different things, you know, and it might make better sense because us men, we do have better upper body strength, so we're more equipped to do certain things, and then women are more equipped to do certain other things, to have amazing stamina and so on. So it might make sense in the physical sense to divide up roles based on that. Although if you go a little deeper in indigenous culture, like fire, for example, is considered a masculine deity, and food is a nurturing thing. So it makes sense to have the men take care of the fire and the women take care of the food. But it's not a diminishment. It's not saying that's a lesser role. It's saying, please, we respect you. You know, you're the sacred gender. Take care of this food. And men, you have this strength of working with this masculine energy. Please, you do this. So it's a division of roles based on respect. Now, in the corporate world, everything is interchangeable. You don't really necessarily have roles that, you know, I mean, there isn't anything really in a corporation that one gender or the other can't do. There are some physical things like, you know, hanging drywall or something that really requires a tremendous amount of upper body strength, which I don't know if there are very many women. I'm sure there are, but I'm probably not very many women rushing to sign up to hang drywall, you know, and there aren't very many men signing up to be au pairs, although there's no reason why a man couldn't be one. But that's just sort of how it works. But other than these exceptions, everything is interchangeable. So how do we apply this concept of the sacredness of the feminineness of the life givers and the strength of men and what we have to offer? And I don't just mean physical strength. And how does that apply into a corporate structure? So the way that I approach it is more in the tone and the nature and in the respect that we have for the differences of the genders. For example, if you have a man in a corporate leadership position and he's very passionate, then he's typically complimented for his passion and his vigor. If you have a woman in a corporate environment and she's very passionate, she's typically criticized for being too emotional. So there's this and there's studies that show this. I mean, they've researched this and it's actually quite, you know, been documented extensively. So if we flip the model again, and if we look at emotion as not being a weakness, but actually being a strength. If we look at women and the fact that they feel things more deeply, that they tend to be more sensitive than us men, they have stronger intuition. So if we look at that as a value and not as a diminishment, then we actually can value these two energies within an organization. So if we're sitting in a room and we've got a committee and we've got, you know, roughly half men and women, and we're looking to launch a new product line, for example, and if we really respect the balancing of the genders, we're really listening in a unique way. And if a woman is very impassioned and says, I think this product is going to be offensive to women, then the men are going to be like, oh, we better listen. Like if there's that respect, right? You're going to be like, I need to hear her. Where's she coming from here? I need to hear her perspective. Or if it's a product that might appeal to men, you know, then the same thing could happen in the reverse. You know, the men could be like, I don't get it. It doesn't work for me. And the women are like, okay. And working to put themselves in their perspective. Like there's a respect between the difference as opposed to, and I've seen this personally in the corporate world, is successful high-level women executives working overtime to be like men. So instead of really owning their womenness, owning their intuition, owning their passion, their emotion, owning their voice in particular, they're trying to emulate how the other men are in the corporate world because they think that's what they need to do in order to be successful. And in fact, what they're doing is they're holding back on all their true gifts. So if they could, if in a culture, in a business culture, if we value those two different energies equally, and in particular, since we have kind of snuffed out the feminine energy so much, really focus on bringing that to life within organizations, what we're going to find is that organizations are going to become, of course, more balanced, but more importantly, they're going to become more intuitive, more innovative, more adaptable, and frankly, more interesting, because they're going to be richer. Their marketing, everything is going to be richer.
So, and Glenn, how did you come to this awareness that incorporating these indigenous principles, bringing these different pieces, which we've talked about one, and maybe you can use another as an example.
I didn't hear the first part of your question. How did I come to what?
How did you come to the awareness that applying these principles to business would be not only useful, but really essential and important?
It was really discovering it on my own. So it was 1997 when I was first introduced into indigenous ceremonies, into the teepee ceremony. And I really had no idea what I was getting into, and it was really quite mind-blowing. It was an amazing, powerful experience. It was very difficult and challenging as well for me. And on the one hand, I felt these ceremonies were just difficult. Like, I couldn't figure out why anyone would want to do them. And yet, the feeling of peace that came over me afterwards was so profound that I had to get myself back. And so for many years, I was just, and this is when I was still living in California, and I was working for a Fortune 500 company. And for many years, I was living this life of like one leg in the corporate world and one leg in these indigenous ceremonies. And all I knew on the indigenous side is I needed it. That on some level, I was sick emotionally inside from everything from my childhood and so on, that I needed to just keep going, and I needed to keep healing. I needed to keep receiving and learning. And I would go to these ceremonies, I would seek the elders, I'd sit down with them afterwards, I'd ask them a bunch of questions and listen, and I made relations too. In 2002, I was adopted into a Navajo family of mostly medicine people. I was trained in their ways. 2008, I was officially adopted into their clan, given their clan name. And then in 2000, I think it was 15, I guess it would be 12. 2012, my wife Marie and I were ordained with one of their traditions. And so it's been this kind of journey ever since then. And throughout those years, particularly the early years, what I was noticing, like probably maybe took 3-4 years into it, maybe even more than that, 5 years into it, I started to notice I was getting much better at how I did business. And when I looked at why, it had to do with my indigenous training. And I thought, this is really crazy. And I literally consciously thought, I need to keep this to myself, because if I told people, I think they would think I was nuts. So for several more years, I kept it to myself. And it was 2009, May of 2009, when it hit me like a flash. And I had moved out to Asheville. I was working for a small boutique event company doing business development and sales. And still really unhappy. So I had left the dysfunctional culture of a Fortune 500 company to join an even more dysfunctional culture in a small family-owned company, and and very unhappy, and really kind of searching and looking. And then it just hit me that everything that I was learning from these indigenous ways was so applicable that there was a completely different, better way that we could do business that we weren't really looking at. And it was coming from these indigenous ways. And I saw this whole vision of taking it to business people and doing workshops and coaching and things like that. And of course, that was 2009. This is 2015. I certainly had no clue how to go about accomplishing it in 2009, but I've kind of been germinating this idea ever since then and making it more a reality in the last couple of years. So the short answer is, to the very long answer is, the principles are very compatible. It has to do with their value systems. And at the same time, if you go pick the top 10 books that are out there about leadership and business strategy, Simon Sinek, for example, Start With Why, a lot of Seth Godin stuff, and Jim Collins' Good to Great, and Raj Sisodia with Firms of Endearment. You know, you pick like the top 10, you know, books. John Mackey, CEO of Whole Foods. You read their books, you listen to them speak, and you look at what they're really saying. They're really talking about values. They're really talking about coming from a different place. Excuse me. Another really good one to read is Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos.com. It's a fabulous book. Again, values. It's about creating a culture that's based on values that offers an opportunity for all the people in an organization and all the people that support that organization, including investors and customers and people in the community and so on, to celebrate and be in joy about the fact that this company is united around meaningful values. So when companies align themselves around meaningful values, everyone gets really excited about working there, about buying their products, about doing business with them, about investing in them, and so on. So they're all, and these values, they're essentially indigenous values.
Right.
Being connected with one another, respecting nature, sustainability, having a higher purpose of doing good, of being in service. These are inherently indigenous concepts.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I can relate on so many levels, Glenn. I got started on my spiritual path, like I was saying, in the early 90s, and Native American tradition was the first path that I took, and I actually went and studied with grandmother Twyla. She was the grandmother of the Wolf Clan, the Seneca Nation, and did ceremony with her, and was adopted into the Wolf Clan of the Senecas and given medicine names. So I related to, and it was like the first time that I actually felt like I had a family, you know,
Yeah.
And connection. And did Vision Quest with her, which, you know, I came from living in a big city, growing up in the city, and never really feeling connected or happy there, knowing that I wanted deeper roots. And the first couple of days were terrifying, and then the last, you know, first half was terrifying, and the second half was revelationary in how connected we are to all life.
Mm-hmm.
And it totally shifted my entire paradigm in relation to being on the planet, being a human being, being a part of it as opposed to separate, and this value piece, which in my own life I've been, you know, learning to ask myself what's important to me, what has meaning to me, as opposed to what the culture has been feeding me my whole life. Which even at 20, I was miserable. I knew I couldn't live that way. I was already, you know, numbing myself out with drugs and nearly killed myself, ready to check out based on the values that I had learned.
Yeah.
And so I can relate that my whole life has been a journey of exploring values, and then very slowly working to incorporate those values that work for me in my life so that I can live healthy and happy and sustainably.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, this last piece where you're talking about the values and within a business. You know, I recently got involved with a business. It's a multi-level marketing company, and it's called Empower Network. And I bring this up because it's all about values. It's all about each person, you know, living according to their highest ideas for their lifestyle, and then creating tribes, like attracting people into their, you know, organization, their business, their team, and they call tribes, which I really love. I think that coin that term was coined by Seth Godin, like you said, and people do get excited, and they do get juiced, and you can just feel it. It's alive and electric, and they're all helping each other to prosper and succeed, as opposed to compete and having hierarchies and all that. And it's just really cool. So just relating to what you're sharing, and it's awesome. So I'll also give you a break there. So go ahead.
It's all back to Milton Friedman economics. So what what he did, but it wasn't just him alone. You know, it was a lot of other like sort of powerful interests that took Milton Friedman's message and said, let's grab this and let's put it out there because it serves our benefit. But in that action of making money the God, we've diminished ourselves. So if we look at this differently, what is money really? It's an abstract concept. You know, it's a piece of paper. I don't have any bills with me here, but if I hold up a $20 bill, it's a piece of paper that you and I and a bunch of other people have agreed has an intrinsic value, even though it really is just a piece of paper. It's not backed in gold anymore or anything of that nature. What it really is, though, is it's a tool. If I go to your house and I fix something in your house and you give me this $20 bill for the work that I do, or you come to my house and you fix my car and I give you this $20 bill for something you've done for me, it's an exchange. So I go to your house, I fix something, you give me a $20 bill, then I go to the grocery store, I buy some food, I give them that $20 bill. All it is a tool of exchange. So a carpenter, his tools are going to be a hammer and saw. A painter, their tool is going to be brush, canvas, paints, and so on. Carpenter doesn't make the hammer and saw his master. The hammer and the saw, they serve the carpenter. But what we've done in our modern society is we've made the tool the God where we serve the God as opposed to using the tool to serve us. Do we work to make money, or do we make money to do the work that really feeds our soul? And that's the flip of the paradigm that we're really getting at. So what we've really done by accepting money as the God as being the overarching goal and the reason for doing everything that we do, we've diminished ourselves into a very much smaller existence than what our lives are really intended to be about, which is expansive, which is about connecting with people, which is about it evolving spiritually, which is about enjoying the true fruits of life, which you don't necessarily need money to do, you know, to go take a walk in a park or in the woods. So, or, you know, enjoy the laughter of a small child, or, you know, these simple things. They don't really require money. Connecting with your loved ones, it doesn't require money. Money is just a tool. So it's flipping these values upside down. And the thing that is with values, you know, Enron had on their website, and I don't remember the exact words, but it was right on their website. They had, you know, we respect integrity and all this kind of stuff. You know, they had these kind of platitudes on their website, and they were a criminal organization. So it's easy to just make words up and just say, you know, to create core values and say respect, integrity, all this stuff. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything if it's not backed up in action. Values, and this is something that Indigenous people have always understood, it doesn't come from me just saying to a group of children and saying, it's very important to be honest, always tell the truth. That isn't really enough. You know, it takes like a lifetime to develop really, really strong integrity on every level. And children have to see the example of it too, right? They have to see our examples year after year after year, and they have to see when we fall down that we're willing to show our fallibility and say, you know what, I didn't do this the best that I could do it there, and I'm sorry, and here's how I'm going to do it differently next time. So they see these examples and they learn from the elders that way, from their mistakes, and understanding that we're all fallible, we all make mistakes, and it's a process that we get there. So like when my wife, who's also my partner, we work together with companies, we help them develop their core values. You know, like it's really critical and really important in the process that everyone understands that what we're doing is we're creating a set of values that are what you are aspiring to, and that you are not perfect, so you're never going to get it right all the time. But this is what you're aspiring to. And when you put it out there publicly, you put it on your website and you know, share it widely internally, and you have meetings and talk about it, maybe even have exercises and outings and things that you do to work on your core values as an organization, strengthen them, and so on. You're always looking at them from the standpoint of how do we do better, and not from beating ourselves up about where we've fallen short, but acknowledging, and then, okay, how do we move forward? How do we get stronger in these areas? And then it's that action of moving into stronger values that everyone sees, the employees see, the customers see, when a company is willing to own up to its mistakes and say, this product we put out, we realized it wasn't designed properly, we're going to call it back and we're going to fix it, or we're going to give you a rebate, or we're going to do this. And not like trying to sweep it under the rug and cover it, over, when companies do that, when they come out and they say, we realize we made a mistake and here's what we're going to do to make it right. Like, people are really forgiving of that. They really respect that. So it's the actions over time that we put forward that strengthens our culture through this adherence, through this growing, adapting, evolving adherence to values that have deeper meaning.
Now, along those lines, Glenn, a couple of pieces come up for me. The first one is, if we go back to a values-based approach, perspective within a business, wouldn't even the products that you're designing and creating might be completely different or have a different purpose, because you're now based on serving the greater good in the whole than making a profit. Like, even the quality of the product right out of the gate might be better than something you're trying to put back because you're trying to save pennies or save money or have it break in a year so they buy a new one. That would support the culture and economy and so the quality of the product and the purpose of the product is different. And then the other piece, and maybe asking two questions at the same time, but the other point is, like you just said, even when we admit our mistakes, part of the underlying fear is like, if we show our weakness, then we're showing that we're of less value, and people will value us less. But really the opposite is true. People have more respect for us. So in terms, it actually might generate more profit, not that being the end goal, but because we're of a higher character, people actually trust us more and want to invest and spend more money with us, no matter what we do, whether an individual or a company.
Raj Sodhi and two other authors, or three authors, wrote the book Firms of Endearment. It was published in 2007. And what they did was they researched extensively. It was an academically based book, extensively. And I think it was about 17 companies that they categorized as firms of endearment. They were companies that manage themselves based on what they call stakeholder relationship management. So instead of shareholder, where it's sort of focused on profitability with stakeholders, it was employees, community, customers, investors, it was everybody. That those companies consistently outperform the S&P index by a factor of 9 to 1. So there's actually a fair amount of evidence that shows that when companies manage themselves in the long term, that they actually become more profitable as a result, because they're more able to set aside short-term benefits and look for long-term. So in the long term, they just get stronger and stronger.
Beautiful. And so how do we see this? Like, what's the importance and how it affects our overall culture? So our corporations are starting to incorporate these principles and see the purpose and value in them. How's that important to our culture overall?
Extremely important. We spend most of our waking hours in work, right? So with our coworkers, we tend to spend more hours than with our spouses and children. And it is, whether we like it or not, it affects culture. Business culture affects the broader culture. So if we start changing business culture one company at a time, it is going to affect the broader culture. We're going to take it home with us. So if we have the ability, first of all, when people, I believe that people really hunger for deeper values. And we see it when you have companies that operate from a place of higher values. People are banging on the door to go work there. They can't wait to get a job there. And once they get a job there, they don't want to leave because it feels good. They're happier. So if they're happier in their work, they're going to go home and be happier. And if they see that they can do business from a place of values, from doing the right thing, like Zappos with their customer service ethic of, wowing customers. And if they have a problem with a product, they just take care of it no matter. We don't argue with them and say, well, this paragraph here, this fine print here. They just take care of it. They make them happy because they know those good feelings are gonna permeate. They're gonna keep coming back and doing more business and telling their friends and family to do business with Zappos. And guess what? It's worked. They're a multi-billion-dollar company now. So when they see that in a business context, how it works, they can more readily bring it home. And it really can affect young people a lot who haven't even gotten married yet, who haven't started families and so on. So they can work in this environment of these values. And then as they start to get married and create their own family, they can bring that culture into their own life. It's just going to permeate out. Advertising is another thing. I mean, advertising and sales, but particularly advertising, how much of it is based on manipulation? versus inspiration. A great deal of it. You know, sex is one of the things that's used to sell a lot of products. And a lot of products are being generated that really aren't good. They just plain aren't good for us. There's certain video games that are just so horrendously violent that I don't think it's good for our society, for young people to be partaking in them. But young people love these games, and companies make lots of money off of them. And there are plenty of other businesses that we could talk about here and go on for hours that really don't have a very good moral effect on our broader culture. So businesses start to operate more that way. Here's another example, is the oil company. Sorry, you have a question you want to interject?
Well, I was just going to say, and you can continue with your subject, but I was going to say, and my question was, what are some examples of some companies that are really doing this right, that are really embracing these principles, and it really shows that you're aware of, that really turn you on?
Southwest Airlines is a great example. When 9/11 hit, they went to their employees and they said, we don't want to lay anyone off. You know, because the airline industry was decimated after 9/11. I mean, those companies were going Chapter 11 all the time. And they said, we don't want to lay anyone off. How can we figure this out? And they were a small company at the time. They only had a few airplanes. So the employees got together and they strategized, and they figured out a way of being more efficient, to where literally everyone would help to turn over an airplane when they landed. Even the pilots would get in there and help clean the plane and get it turned over and ready to go back out. And they just figured out how they could all work together as a team to be more efficient, to where they could return one of their 3 airplanes and work with 2 and still service the same number of routes. So they just saved a huge chunk of expense and didn't have to lay off any people. Now today they're like the most profitable airline in the world. Their stock symbol is LUV for love. Their CEO is this person with a sense of humor. There's a lot of YouTube videos. If you go to YouTube and just search Southwest Airlines, you'll find these crazy videos of people doing the safety explanations, either in a rap or a song or stand-up comedy, and they have fun. They're an airline with personality. Also, Southwest Airlines doesn't see their union as, they don't have an oppositional relationship with their union. They see them as a partner. They work with them. So there's no distrust or tension between them. They have a very symbiotic relationship together. So people go to work there, they don't want to quit. They're happy. And when they're happy, they're going to do everything they can for that company to be successful. Even people coming up with skits and raps and comedy to make something so dreary as the safety explanation at the beginning of the flight so entertaining that people are like, wow, this is the best flight I've ever been on. I mean, David, it's a really simple formula, right? You treat people with respect and genuinely care for them, and guess what? They treat your business with respect and genuinely care for your business. I mean, it's really simple, but here's the rub. It's not necessarily easy, right? It's just like we can't just say to the businesses and the business leaders, treat people with respect and love them genuinely, and they're going to go do it. No more than we can say to a 10-year-old boy who just sold a candy bar and say, stealing's bad, don't do that, young man, right? That isn't enough for that young man. He needs to see our examples, and he needs to have a lot of opportunities throughout his childhood and adolescence to experiment and learn and listen and have his own experiences with integrity and honesty before he develops an ethic that's really strong. And we keep developing it well into adulthood. It's a process. It's not just, we don't just preach and say, I could come up with the ultimate core values and just hand it to every corporate leader and say, here, this will fix your company. But it doesn't work that way. It's what's put into action. What's put into action, it comes from how we are personally, individually.
Yeah. Well, and I can see, because even if we do start that process, all of us are so ingrained in trying to, just because of the way our society has been functioning in the past of sort of competition, that, even within a culture of business, we're so used to getting what we can get, giving the least amount of effort or energy to get the most back, and how to heal that within individuals and within a company, and then also still having good traditional values and rules, because you still, you're also not going to let people walk all over you. So there's that, having the boundaries and being able to still respect each other in that way. And And so, what do you see, or what do you implement as like the basic steps that a company takes to start moving in this direction?
It's a great point for segueing the conversation, because I was just sort of thinking along these lines, like in all my years of spending time on the native reservations, mostly with the Navajo people and in the ceremonies and sitting with elders. I'll give you an example. Back when I was still living in LA and in my corporate job, and a very fast-paced life, and living in Los Angeles itself is a very fast-paced city. You can't even get anywhere unless you're really becoming an aggressive driver, for example. And then here I would go out to Arizona, these really remote parts of the reservation where there's no cell signal, nobody has a laptop. And people are living in hogans with dirt floors and no running water, and they go outside to an outhouse. And I'm sitting with someone who's, I don't even know how old, but very elderly, speaks very little English, mostly Navajo, and I'm just being in their presence. And the first couple of days that I would go out there, I felt this excruciating impatience. It was like this grating feeling inside my chest cavity that like I almost wanted to scream, because the pace there was so slow and I was coming from this environment that was so fast. But I knew that the energy that I was bringing in was frantic, and the energy that they were coming from was placid and serene, and I wanted what they had, so I kind of like went with it. And after a couple of days, I would slow down and I would stop jabberjawing so much and start listening more. And eventually, after a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, I would be fully in sync with them on a sort of an energy level. So, and then on my return trip, driving back into Los Angeles, once I passed San Bernardino and the traffic would start, people would be following a closer distance and going faster and darting around, and all of a sudden I was like, whoa, this is really uncomfortable. Like I had the reverse feeling going back into Los Angeles and going back into my corporate life. So what I learned from that is this contrast of a different state of being, a different energy place. And so the work that we do in our workshops, for example, and is we have people, we sit around a fire. We don't like sit inside a square room and sit in the front on a riser and talk down to people, but we sit in a circle around the fire. And fire has a very calming effect, and we have a very deliberate, slow pace to our workshops. Our workshops are not electronics. We ask everyone to power down and pass a basket around in the morning for them to put their cell phones into, and they get it back at the end of the day. And that in itself is really uncomfortable for people to have to be without their iPhone or smartphone for an entire day. And then we have it catered. We serve food, very simple food, intentionally so, because that's how indigenous people used to eat, was very simplistically. And we spend this time around the fire having very slow conversations, and we use a talking stick, which is a modality where the person holding the stick is the only person talking. Nobody else interrupts that person. And in the business realm, what we typically do when you go to a conference room and you're having a business meeting is that we're listening only so that we can respond and interject. And all the extroverts are the ones that are getting all their points across, and the introverts are just being sort of walked over. When you have a talking circle with a talking stick, everyone has the opportunity. I think I lost you here. I don't know if you can hear me still. Hey.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. Still here. Screen went blank. Everyone has the opportunity to speak. As long as they're holding that stick, they can talk as long as they want. Absolutely no one interrupts them. And so if I'm listening to someone and I feel like I have something I want to interject, it gives me the space to let go of what I want to interject with, because I may not be the next person that gets that stick. It might go to you. It might go to somebody else. It might be a half an hour before I get the stick. So what it does is the construct of it forces me to slow down my communication and to really listen to this person and to really consider, is what I have to interject really that important to interject at this point in time? Or is it more important to just listen to this person? So we give people an opportunity to be in an environment to slow way down, to have a slower pace of communication, and learn a different style of communication. And we do it, we sit on the ground, unless people have back or hip issues, give them a chair, but otherwise we sit on the ground around a fire. We connect with nature. We have time alone in nature. We meld with the pace of nature over the course of a day or a weekend, if they come for a weekend. So that's like, our way of helping people to slip into a different space, because once they slow down like that, that's the perfect place where a person can start to really look more deeply, more honestly, more truly at their value systems and how they really want to be in their business world and what's really true for them about how they want to go about doing their work in the world. So indigenous people, you know, in indigenous culture was sit with elders around the fire and be quiet and listen. You know, like we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? To listen twice as hard as we talk. That's a decidedly indigenous way of being, is that listening concept. I would go out in my early years and I'd see people, you know, relatives and such that I hadn't seen in a long time, and I was happy to see them, and I'd sit down and just be jabber-jawing away, and they would just sit there. Oh, yeah, just kind of like that, you know. Yeah, oh, listening, you know. Oh, it's kind of like a Navajo thing. It's like their acknowledgement. Oh, they would just do that and just listen to me until I got tired of talking. And then there'd be this long, painful pause, and then somebody would finally start to say something. But not trivial, not like, oh, the weather looks like it's going to rain, but, you know, like something meaningful, something important. And then the whole energy would just slow down in the room. So these things are practices, you know. We don't just we don't go to a workshop and flip the switch and now we communicate differently. It becomes a practice. We have to endeavor to practice, to slip into a different energy space, to spend more time with nature on a regular basis, because it has a very healing effect and it helps to bring about our intuition. And as we do that, we start to see more of the realities of our life, what's true and what isn't true about how we do our work in the world. We need to really see that. We really need to go to that place through connection with nature to see what is both true and not true about our lives and about our work. And then we know how to proceed. We know how to move forward. And that's how we learn how to shift our culture and organization.
Beautiful. I love it. And I can imagine there's a lot of good wisdom and more practical stuff in your book on Shift, right? And where can they get a copy of that? Do you have it on Amazon, or where's the best place to get a copy?
You can go to my website too, balancediz.com. There's a link for Shift, and then they can link out to purchase it. It's available, you know, barnesandnoble.com, CEO.com, all those places. They can get it.
Awesome. I know I definitely need to get a copy. I'm fascinated by this and how to apply it in my own business. And I really loved your blog post. I mean, that's what inspired me to put you on an interview. So I really encourage everyone to go to Glenn's website, balanced, like past tense, balancediz.com, one word, and sign up for your newsletter, because your weekly blog posts on this subject are really awesome. I really learned a lot and enjoy them.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Glenn, really, thank you. Thank you for the time and the wisdom. Really enjoyed what we shared, and I look forward to having lunch and talking more sometime soon.
Yeah, would love that.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add to wrap up and
just a little plug on the blog again at the website. The blog is called Heart and Mind. I publish once a week, every Wednesday morning, and there's just various topics on culture and balancing and bridging the heart and the mind and letting the heart be the true driver of what we do, which is really what we're talking about here with values and purpose and all of that.
Yes, and that was another big inspiration for me, because, you know, I have learned that our heart is the key. It's the direct connection to our spirit and our true eternal self, and it is where we do tune into our true, more eternal and meaningful values and beginning to operate from there. As much as we're moving more into a matriarchal, feminine society again, I believe our hearts are part of that picture too, that we are beginning to learn to operate more from our hearts. And it was that one article specifically we were talking about that really touched me.
That's what us men in particular have so much to learn from women, because one thing we can never experience is giving birth. And that's something that I think most all women will tell you who've given birth, that it's like the single most beautiful moment of their life.
Yes.
Giving birth to a new life from their body. And us men can never experience that. We can never have that. So we have something to learn from them on that.
Yes.
On that level.
Yeah, although I can only relate, being at my little girl's birth, that one of the single most beautiful moments in my life was the first sound of my little girl that she made. I mean, there's just no way to put it in words, how it actually opened my heart and has continued to bless my life every day that she's in my life. So,
yeah.
Thank you again, brother. I think it's time to wrap up here.
Yeah.
And I look forward to, if we want to do another one, maybe we can pick another subject and talk about it another time.
Be happy to.
All right, brother. Peace Blessings to everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Damon.